Okay, guys. So hello. It's been a couple of weeks. Um, in preparation for our next test coming up in the next couple of weeks, and as we're still on the medieval ages and on Chaucer, I wanted to step back a little bit and please, if you haven't yet looked at the PowerPoint slide for Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it's the most recent slide in our class PowerPoint. Go back and look at that and then listen to this. Um, we're looking at Chaucer right now, and that's Chaucer is really satire on some stereotypes that get created in the Middle Ages. And so I wanted to go back and kind of look at one of the more famous stories, one of the legends of King Arthur's knights, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, in order to just get kind of a straight up story where, like, for example, the stereotypes were originally created. And so look at the PowerPoint. A couple of key concepts in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight that are developed. One is chivalry, and chivalry was for knights what Dharma was for people in Indian culture and Indian literature, right? In religion, it's chivalry for a knight is doing what is right for a knight. Includes things like fighting for your king, upholding his honor, and doing what's right by ladies, and courtly love comes into that. And so as I tell this story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, I'm just going to tell it to you. I want you to think about chivalry. Like, what can you tell from this story is right behavior for a knight, and also courtly love. Like, how does he treat women? So, so one year, I'll just tell the story. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. One year, it was December. It was cold outside, and Arthur and his queen, King Arthur and his queen Guinevere, and his knights, the knights of his round table, which Arthur built a round table for his knights so that no one was sitting at the head of it. So it's kind of like this sense of equality. And so Arthur and his knights were sitting around the table. They were enjoying their wine and their food. Like we talked about, it was kind of like medieval times. They're all picking away with their hands. I imagine Guinevere, his wife, being very dainty, like the wife of Bath, right? And someone's playing some music, strumming on an instrument, and they're all just having a good time, closed in there from the cold, from the winter outside, enjoying each other's company. The kingdom's at peace, partly because it's wintertime, partly because Arthur's fought a bunch of battles and sort of brought peace to the kingdom. And so they're all sitting there having a good time, and suddenly there comes a pounding on the door, this giant oak door, right? There comes a pounding on the door, and they're like, who could that be? And Arthur's like, well, we're not afraid of anybody. We're not afraid of the big bad wolf, right? So send somebody. I've got my knights of the round table here. And so send somebody to open that door. And so they open the door, someone lifts the big bar holding the door closed, and the door bursts open, and into the main room of the castle here, rides this giant horse, and its saddle and everything is green, and on it sits this giant green man, this knight. I imagine him wearing like a kilt or something, right? And he's kind of got a glow. He's almost glowing, and he's got this long, shaggy hair and beard, and he's all in green, and he's carrying this battle axe. And he rides up to them, and he jumps off the horse onto the table and knocks dishes flying everywhere. And he's standing there in front of the table. He just ruined Guinevere's best outfit. And he starts to mock them, and he's like, so this is the famous King Arthur and his knights. And he says, and you guys are just holed up here in the castle, drinking wine, eating your mutton, right? And he says, I think you guys have gotten weak, and flaccid because you haven't fought anybody for a while. So I'm not really impressed looking around here. Well, Arthur and his knights are incensed. And they're like, how dare you come in here and make fun of us? We're King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And the Green Knight, the Green Knight standing there from the table, well, he says, well, how about I give you a challenge? Since I've insulted you, I'll give you a challenge. And if you're up to the test, then I'll take back my words. And so they say, okay, what's your challenge? And he says, my challenge is that I want one of you knights to get up here on this table. And I want you to take this axe and I'll bend over and I want you to give me your best whack on my neck. And he says, in return, 1 year from now, you need to travel to my home where I live, my green. It's called the Green Chapel. You need to travel to the Green Chapel where I live, which is north, like a month's journey from here north, and you need to let me take a whack at your neck. And they're all sitting around the table thinking, this is absurd. This is absurd. We can't just randomly kill this dude, and of course he's not going to survive that. And our conscience wouldn't let us get away with that, right? And so they're like, but then he's laughing at them and he's mocking at them. He's like, what? You're too afraid to do this? You're too afraid to take me up on my challenge? And so finally they're so frustrated that they're like, qualms aside. And for some reason, I guess Lancelot is the greatest knight. He's Arthur's greatest knight. And for some reason, he's not there at the time. So he doesn't volunteer. I'm sure he would have if he was there. But Sir Gawain, he raises his hand and he says, I'll do it. I'll do it to protect the king's honor, even though I feel bad just taking a whack at a guy's neck with an axe because he's an idiot, obviously, but I'll do it to save the honor of my king and to, hold up the honor of my fellow knights of the Round Table and my queen, to protect her honor. And so Gawain, he stands up on the table, and the Green Knight, he bends his neck over, and Gawain takes the axe and he lifts it up, and it's a pretty hefty axe, and he swings it, gives it his best whack, and the head falls off. There's green blood oozing out everywhere. It rolls across the table, spatters everything. It's nasty, and the body crumples to the table. Well, they're all standing around just horrified, and Gawain's like, what have I done? I just killed like an innocent person with an axe because he was an idiot, But then suddenly the headless body stands up, and their hair is all standing on end now, and the body walks over and picks up the head by the hair, by that long, shaggy hair. And then the body climbs onto the horse and holds the head up, and the head starts to talk. And they're all like freaked out now, but they can't do anything. They're just sitting there in stunned, silence. And the head says to them, it says, okay, so now, you've taken the first part of the challenge. You've given my neck a whack. And in a year's time, you've got to travel to my chapel, which is a month's journey, north of here, and find me and let me return the blow. And then he laughs in some more mocking laughter, evil laughter, supernatural evil laughter. And the horse rides out with the knight, holding his head in his hand. Well, after that, there's a stunned silence, and nobody knows what to do. The months move on. Winter's over. Spring comes. Fall. Spring comes. Summer comes. It's getting on to fall, and Gawain realizes, nobody's going to forget that. Everybody remembers that he made that promise. He stood up and made that cut, and yet a lot of them are like, Gawain, that wasn't fair. Yeah, you didn't know this guy was some supernatural being. He cheated, right? But Gawain knew. he knew to uphold the honor of the court, the king, the queen, he's got to go, And so finally, getting about mid-fall, he climbs onto his horse, and he, all the maidens get out there and weep for him and stuff, and throw flowers in his path, and then he rides off. And of course, he goes through many adventures and journeys. He crosses freezing cold rivers. He fights wolves at night. He chops up a few ogres along the way. He rescues some damsels in distress, some ladies who are being robbed, or some ruffian is trying to rape them, and he rescues them and sets them free. And rescues some peasants that some robbers are trying to take their food, their stores. So he has some adventures along the way, and he's traveling. He travels for like a month, and he's beginning to worry. He's like, it's getting near to Christmas Eve, which was when the Green Knight showed up, and I still haven't found this place. And he's like, what am I going to do? And then one day he comes riding out of the woods into a little clearing, into a little glade, and there's this little green cottage. He rides up to the cottage. It's not really a cottage. It's a big cottage. I mean, it's more like a mini mansion, a good, decent-sized house, right? And so he rides up, and he raps on the door, and the door opens, and there's this beautiful lady in this long, green, flowing robe, and she invites him into the house, and she says, "Oh, my husband's out hunting, but he'll be home in a little bit. We love visitors. We don't have any guests, right?" And so she says, "Why don't you come in and sit down by the fire and enjoy yourself and wait for my husband to come home?" And so he sits there by the fire and rests his feet. He's exhausted. He's been traveling for like a month, In fact, in a few days, he's supposed to meet the Green Giant, and he's kind of depressed, kind of like Aeneas on his quest. He's like, he's like, am I going to find this guy, right? Well, then as he's sitting there musing on this, there's the door bursts open. And in walks this little lively man, he's kind of dressed like a leprechaun, he's got his roughly tailored green hunting garments on, and he walks in and and he greets his wife with a kiss, and he's bustling around. And then he sees Sir Gawain, and she's like, "Oh yes, this man showed up this afternoon, and I told him you'd be home in a little while." And so the man gave Sir Gawain a greeting, and he said, "We're so glad that you're here, because we don't have guests very often." Well, so they sit down to dinner, and the man had been out hunting that day, and he caught some rabbits. And his wife went into the kitchen like a good, dutiful wife, right? Stereotype there, guys. And she, although there's truth to stereotypes, which is why people get stereotyped that way, right? Just cultural things. But moving on from that, so she's in there preparing the dinner, the rabbits, and they're sitting by the fire. And the man says, "Gawain, so tell me, what brought you here?" And so Sir Gawain went through the whole tale about, the Christmas Eve feast and the giant coming in, the Green Knight / Green Giant, and how he's been on his quest to find him, and he's getting worried because he doesn't know where the Green Chapel is. He's only got like 3 days to find it. And the little man says, "Well, I know where the Green Chapel is, and it's just about an hour's march through the woods from here, and I can even direct you to it. So why don't you stay here for a few days and rest up?" And Gawain was overjoyed at this, right? It's wonderful news. And then the man said, "Gawain, while you're here, I go out hunting every day to catch meat for my wife and I to eat. And I think you should just stay here and rest up. Why don't we make a little deal while we're here?" And Gawain says, "Okay, well, what would that deal be? I'm a little afraid of deals." But the man said, "It's nothing crazy like cutting my head off or anything." And he says, here's the deal. So each day I'll go out hunting, and whatever I bring, and you'll be at home here around my wife. And so just to make sure that we're safe and all, and you're honoring my marriage and, being my good, faithful guest, I want you to just promise me that if my wife gives you anything, whatever she gives you during the day, that when I bring home food and give to you what I've gotten during the day, that you will give to me what you have received during the day. If you receive anything from my wife. And Gawain was like, I like that. That'll help keep me chivalrous, help keep me honorable as a knight. And so he says, okay, I'll do it. Well, they go and they have dinner. And Gawain goes to bed in a nice feather bed and sleeps like a baby. And the next morning when he wakes up, the little green man is already, he's already gone. He's already hunting, right? So Gawain eats his breakfast and he's sitting in the living room enjoying himself. And the lady, the lady of the house, she comes in and she sits in a chair nearby. And she says, Gawain, I feel so bad for you that you've traveled such a long way and journeyed so hard. And I know you've been without a woman's attention for a long time. And she said, Gawain, I just, out of a sense of warm friendliness, and I would just like to give you a kiss on the cheek. And Gawain's like, well, okay. You realize though that of course your husband made me make a promise to him, and she said yes. And so he said, as long as we're up on the up, I don't mind a friendly neighborly kiss, And so she walked over to him and she gave him a warm kiss right on the cheek, and it did make him feel a little rosy inside because he hadn't been kissed in a while, and he'd had a shave the night before and stuff, So, so then he went back to reading his newspaper, whatever he was poring over at the time, right? Well, later that evening, the husband gets back and he sits down, and he and Gawain, the husband had shot a deer that day, with his bow and arrow, and so they eat the deer, and it's delicious dinner, some fine wine, and they are sitting down by the fire, and the husband says, "So, have you received anything today from my wife?" And Gawain says, "Yes, I have," and he reaches over and he plants a kiss on the husband's cheek, and the husband says, "Well, thank you. It's good to know that I've got a good, honest, chivalrous knight in my house. All right, Gawain, I'm going up to bed." And so they turn off the lights and go to sleep. And Gawain has a good, peaceful night's rest. The next day, the husband goes off to go hunting again. And as usual, Gawain eats his breakfast and gets a pack of cards, plays a little solitaire, if that was invented back then. And he's sitting by the fire, and he's just resting up. He's been journeying for a month, fighting wolves, ogres, swimming rivers, And he's sitting there by the fire, and she comes in, and she's the wife comes in, and she sits in the chair, and she's just sighing. She's sighing, and Gawain's like, "What's the matter?" And she says, "Gawain, I just feel so burdened for you. I feel like you've had such a hard, difficult journey." And then Gawain, in all honesty, is like, "Yes, I'm totally beat." And she says, "Gawain, I would like to give you just 2 kisses today to refresh you, because I know you've been without a woman's attention for a long time." And Gawain is like, "Okay, well, again, as long as we're up on the up and up, and it's something that you're perfectly fine with me giving to your husband, then yeah, sure." And so, which I'm thinking, Gawain, you can be a little more careful here, But Gawain, he's an innocent, chivalrous knight. His mind isn't going anywhere, And so, so the wife comes over. By the way, I think this is an allergy cough. This is not the other kind. But so his wife comes, the man's wife comes over, and she plants 2 warm kisses on both cheeks. And then she goes about whatever she's doing that day. Well, that evening, the husband arrives and he gives, and they eat the fine dinner. The husband has caught a wild boar, and they have a fine dinner of wild beer and port. And they're sitting by the fire afterwards. And the husband is like, "Okay, Gawain, so did you receive anything today from my wife?" And Gawain says, "Yes, in fact." And he goes over and gives him 2 nice warm kisses on the cheek. And the husband is like, "Well, that's wonderful. Okay, Gawain, have a good evening, have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow." And tomorrow is actually the last day before you need to go meet the Green Knight. Well, the next day, Gawain's sitting in his chair, feet propped up. The wife comes in, and she's sighing and stuff, and she says, "Oh, the journey that you've been on, And she says, "Gawain, I would like to give you 3 kisses today, and I'd like to give you 1 on the mouth, just to give you courage for tomorrow, And Gawain was like, "Okay, as long as you're fine with me kissing your husband on the lips." And she's like, "Oh, that's fine, yeah." And so, they're in more like a European culture where they like to kiss each other a lot, kind of an Italian thing or something. "Oh, my darling," that kind of thing. And so she comes over and she kisses him on one cheek, and kisses him on the other cheek, and then she kisses him on the lips. Not super romantic, it's just kiss on the lips, right? And then she sits back in the chair and she doesn't go out of the room. And she's sighing. And Gawain's like, why are you still sighing? What's going on? And she says, "I'm so burdened for you because you're going to go meet this Green Knight tomorrow and you may die." And he's like, yeah, I've thought about that. But I'm a knight. I'm brave. I'm chivalrous, right? Yeah. Anything for the honor of my king and my queen and my fellow knights of the Round Table. And she says, "Gawain, I would like to give you something that could help you, that could protect you tomorrow. I mean, this green giant, this Green Knight dude, he used magic to defend himself. Why shouldn't you be allowed to use magic to defend yourself?" And he's like, "Well, what is it?" And she's got a sash around her waist. It's a girdle, actually, and it's this green lace girdle. And she unties it, she unpins it, and she takes it. It's kind of like a long scarf, a green lace scarf girdle that she had wrapped around her waist. And she gives it to Gawain. And she says, "If you wear this tomorrow, under your armor, when you go to meet the giant, it has a magical power, and he won't be able to decapitate you." And Gawain is like, part of him is like, "But my honor." But the other part is like, man, again, the knight used magic. And so he's like, he takes it, and he says, "Okay, thank you. I'll think about using it." Well, that evening, the husband gets home and they share some nice roast goose that he managed to shoot with his bow and arrow, and drink some more lovely wine. And then they're sitting there by the fire, and the husband asks, "Okay, Gawain, so what did my wife give you today?" And Gawain comes over and he says, "Well, she gave me 3 kisses and 1 on the mouth." And the husband says, "I'm a hearty European. I like a good kiss on the lips." And so Gawain kisses him on both cheeks and gives him a smack on the lips, and then sits back down. And the husband was like, "So that was what you received today? Well, that's real good." And Gawain was like, "Yeah, that's what I received." And of course, he didn't tell him about the green girdle, because if he gives him that, he was like, I should, because I promised, but I can't, because, this could save my life. And so he's feeling bad about it, but he doesn't say anything about the green girdle. Well, they both go to bed. The next morning, the husband and the wife are both up to see Gawain off. Of course, Gawain has the green girdle on underneath his suit of armor, and they fix him a nice big breakfast and pat him on the back and encourage him and stuff. And Gawain gets on his horse, and he's got his directions, and he rides off. Well, after about an hour, Gawain gets to this glade, and in the middle of the glade is this green chapel. Gawain gets off his horse, And he walks into the Green Chapel very tentatively. He's kind of nervous, right? This is worse than taking final exams. And there in the center of the chapel, standing behind this like big, looks like an altar, is the Green Giant. And he's got the Green Knight, and he's got his axe. And he says, you came. I must confess I'm a little surprised. And yet I'm glad to see that you're willing to uphold the honor of your king and queen and the knights, so that maybe I'll have less cause for mockery after this. And he says, well, come on, let's get it over with. And so Gawain comes walking up to the altar. And he bends over, he climbs up on the altar, and he bends over and bares his neck. He like pulls his lovely knightly curls back over his neck, and there he is with his bare neck. And the Green Knight licks the edge of his axe and takes a swing. But right before he takes a swing, he says, "Oh wait, let me limber up my arms a little bit." And Gawain's getting very nervous right now. He's like, "Come on, get on with it." And then the Green Knight starts again and just barely touches his neck hairs with it. And Gawain was like, "What are you doing? Stop playing with me and just get it over with." And the Green Knight says, "Okay." And he takes it and he hefts it over his head, over his back, and he swings it. And Gawain cringes. But the Green Knight, in fact, did not bring the swing to completion. And so he just barely nicked the skin on Gawain's neck. And the Green Knight is laughing jovially, and Sir Gawain is quite frustrated and upset. And he's like, "You're playing with me." And the Knight's like, No, you passed the test, he said. "Gawain, you have passed the test. I gave 3 swings of my axe for the 3 days that you passed the test of the kisses." And he says, "Gawain, I'm impressed. I'm impressed except for one thing." And he said, "I know about the girdle. And I know that you didn't keep your word to the Green Man, because in fact I am the Green Man." And Gawain looks up, and therefore there he is transformed. The giant is transformed into the Green Man, the husband that he had met. And he says, I'm impressed that you made this journey, that you kept your word to come out here, and that you kept your word about the kisses, and that you came to meet me, and that you bowed down and bared your neck, even though you used some magic, although I'll admit that I used magic. But the one thing where you have fallen short is that you didn't keep your promise to me the night before completely by giving me the green girdle, because you wanted to save your own neck, understandably. So, Gawain, I am impressed, and you have upheld the honor of the Knights of the Round Table, of your king, of your queen. But as a result of your not keeping the word, I want you to take an oath that you will do what I tell you to. And so Gawain is so happy to not have been executed that he's like, and to have the secret out, because it's not good to have a secret that you didn't, give the one thing. So it's all on the table now. On the table, get it, right? And so Gawain said, "Okay, I take my oath, whatever you want me to do." And the Green Knight said, "Well, it's nothing that challenging, but for the rest of your life, whenever you put on your armor, I want you to wear this green girdle on the outside of your armor as a reminder to yourself to keep your word, as a reminder to yourself that you're not perfect, that you have your limitations, and so that others will ask about it and will hear the story of your brave deeds and how you upheld Arthur and his knights, and yet as a story of your humility too, that others would see that you're not perfect and be reminded that they're not perfect." And Gawain said, "Okay, I'll do it." So he tied on the green girdle, and he shook hands with the Green Knight, and he hopped on his horse, which had plenty of packs and provisions from the husband and the wife that they put on there, and he traveled back. And of course had some adventures along the way. And when he got back to Camelot, which again, Camelot is Arthur's famous castle that he built. It's his famous town with his castle that he built for himself after he had won his victories. It's kind of like, it's very similar to King David in Jerusalem, which David, built up Jerusalem as his city. So Arthur had Camelot. So Gawain rides back to Camelot, and he meets Arthur and the knights and Guinevere, and they all ask him about how the adventure went and about the girdle. And the upshot of it all is that all of the knights of the Round Table decide from then on to wear girdles. I mean, their favorite color girdles, but they all wear a woman's girdle around their waist, around their armor from then on, in honor of their comrade who went on this great adventure to uphold their honor. So that is the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And think about, this will be fodder for the test. So in the context of thinking about this for the test and stuff, and two, just conversation, and we can talk about this on our online forum that we're going to be on some for the rest of this semester. Think about, like, how does this story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, how does it relate to things that we know about the culture, the personality of the Middle Ages, and things like the most honored trait, humility of the Middle Ages, things like courtly love, where you can receive certain favors from women and stuff, but you always do it honorably without seeking sexual attention, especially your queens, and chivalry, the code of honor of knights, what it means to behave well as a knight. So think about all these things in the context of this story. One other thing, go back over the Campbell slide that we had, the hero's journey, the different stages of the hero's journey, and look at, in preparation for as part of discussion and in preparation for the test, look at how does Gawain's story match up with different aspects of that hero's journey. All right. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you guys later. More later.